Tonight, we're going to discuss the relationship between internet pornography and things like depression, anxiety, and sexual health. Understanding this information has drastically improved the quality of my life, and my hope is that it can improve the quality of yours as well. Upon researching the topic, pornography and depression, I discovered YourBrainOnPorn.com. It discussed how thousands of guys experience depression, anxiety, isolation, relationship issues, and erectile dysfunction, and upon stopping pornography use, they would no longer experience these issues. Both sexes report a decrease in libido with porn use, and women experience all the other symptoms I discussed, that is, other than erectile dysfunction. So without further ado, here's Marnia Robinson, founder of YourBrainOnPorn.com.
Hi everyone. If you're like me, then as soon as someone starts to hint that they're going to say something unflattering about internet porn, an alarm goes off in your brain and you think, ooh, I just know they have a religious agenda. So I just want to clear up that neither Gary nor I came from a religious background. And in fact, we didn't really have strong feelings about porn at all until certain events occurred. The first of these was that I wrote a book about sex and relationships. And because I'm married to a science teacher, it had a section in it about the appetite mechanisms of the brain, which is what drives your libido, by the way. It's also the part of the brain that goes out of whack in the case of addiction. So I set up a forum to go with this book, and everything flowed along nicely until around 2007 and thereafter. And men began to show up in my forum saying, "We're addicted to porn, can you help?" And my first reaction was, what are you doing here? Why do you think this would be a porn recovery forum? And they said, oh, we just typed sex addiction into Google, and here we are. So then the next thing that happened was I realized that we did have a piece of the puzzle for them, because by explaining how this appetite mechanism of the brain works, they realized that they might have overstimulated that part of the brain, and that could be causing some of these severe symptoms that you'll hear about. Now, that gave them the idea of, oh, maybe if we give that part of the brain a rest for a while, these symptoms will go away. And that's exactly what happened. Then they were very happy, but they were also very angry, because they were like, why isn't this information available in the mainstream? And everything in my book, all the science, was out there in the mainstream. But the mainstream had not been framing the porn issue, the internet porn issue, in terms of this appetite mechanism of the brain. So I took pity on them. I was blogging on Psychology Today, Huffington Post, and I thought, I'll just do a couple of posts about this and get the word out, and then we'll be done. That was the most short-sighted thing I ever did, because now hundreds of men showed up in my forum, which could no longer be used for its original purpose. Instead, it was like visiting a locker room. They were describing in detail all the gory stuff that they had escalated to as that part of their brain became numb to pleasure. And they were also giving us the excruciating ups and downs of the recovery process, which began to sound very much alike. So at this point, I begged my husband, actually I think I bribed my husband to please create a website for these guys where they could read each other's recovery stories and also see the cutting-edge science that was starting to come out about behavioral addiction, its effects on the brains, internet addiction, and so forth. It's really interesting cutting-edge stuff. So finally, around 3 years ago, he set that site up. That's YourBrainOnPorn.com. And the site has no forum, so not much traffic for a forum, but it now has over 40,000 hits a day and over 20,000 unique visitors. It's not a commercial site, we never promoted it, so clearly got around by word of mouth. So the next thing was he was nosy and he was wondering, where are all these people coming from? So he checked the track back and he discovered that there were people that linking to YourBrainOnPorn.com from like 40 different countries, many of which English was not the first language. So what we thought was just a little thin crust of guys with porn problems was turning out to be a pretty thick crust. Another piece of the puzzle there is that about 2 years ago he was asked to give a TEDx talk about this phenomenon. And it went up on the web, as there were two versions of it, and between the two, it has had over 2 million views, which it turns out is a lot for any TED Talk. So there's a lot of interest out there under the radar, and I'm now going to turn the program over to him to tell you something.
about what I call the other porn experiment, but let's first talk about what I call the great porn experiment. And the great porn experiment is every young person with internet access. So for the first time ever, an entire generation has unlimited access to hardcore streaming videos 24/7. Now, in 2009, Canadian researcher Simon Lajeunesse questioned college students and found that most boys see pornography by about age 10, driven by a brain that's suddenly fascinated by sex. Now, when Lajeunesse tried to study porn impact, he couldn't find any college-age males who weren't using it. Of course, he didn't ask anyone here in Austin, but he couldn't find any, and so what we had is, in 2009, we had a headline, "Study stymied by lack of internet porn newbies." Well, undaunted by his lack of non-users, Lajeunesse asked 20 male students, "Has internet porn affected you or your attitudes towards women?" Their answer, "Nah, I don't think so." But they've been using porn for about a decade by then, pretty much nonstop. This is like asking a fish what it thinks about water. If you spent your entire adolescence watching high-speed internet porn, how could you possibly know how it has affected you? Well, you can't. Now be aware there's about 3 or 4 studies that claim to find minimal problems with porn. However, every one of them asked porn users, young adolescents, if they thought it was a problem. We now have a large group of guys who are conducting their own experiment by removing a single variable. I call these guys the other porn experiment. So after years of porn use, they are stopping and reporting the results. No study has ever done this. The other porn experiment consists of hundreds of thousands of individuals all over the globe who are giving up internet porn. This group of individuals is the focus of our website and was the focus of my TED Talk. Here are some of the symptoms and conditions that we did after they give up porn. Now notice, you probably noticed chronic ED, but notice in red there are conditions that get better or significantly improve when porn is removed. Chronic erectile dysfunction, inability to orgasm, delayed ejaculation. See, sexual dysfunctions are the prime motivators for guys to quit, and Gabe will be discussing this later on. Surprisingly, young guys who grew up using internet porn take a lot longer to recover than older guys who are in their 40s and 50s. So a young guy may take up to 12 months to recover, while a guy in his 50s only needs a month. Common unexpected benefits also include improved concentration and brain fog clearing up. And even some diagnosed with ADHD see significant improvement. Now, I want to point out that most of these symptoms that I've listed actually get worse before they get better. Most had no idea they were lethargic or lacked motivation, and then experienced big increases in energy and motivation. Some start new hobbies, some start gaming again, and some even go back to school. Many report social anxiety decreases, often significantly. Others report newfound confidence, and this is the most common benefit that guys report. Now, we've seen mild to moderate depression fade away. As for emotional numbness, most report that they feel far more emotion once they give up porn, or they simply feel more connections to others. Declining interest in real partners can mean loss of libido, or that spark is gone, or there's just no motivation to date. Well, when these reverse, libido returns and husbands find their wives very interesting, and real sex starts to feel good. Finally, the most controversial, escalation to porn that doesn't match original taste or sexual orientation. See, it's real simple. If a fetish or sexual taste fades away after you quit porn, it is not innate. It was porn-induced. Now, how could internet porn lead to such a diverse set of symptoms? Well, I think the symptoms come down to neuroplastic changes. I know that's a big word, but it's simply rewiring of the brain. All this means is that there's certain nerve connections that become stronger, while others become weaker or are lost. Psychiatrist Norman Deutsch had a lot to say about internet pornography in his bestseller, The Brain That Changes Itself. Pornography delivered at high-speed internet connections satisfies every one of the prerequisites for neuroplastic change, unquote. This means that porn can shape your brain and your behaviors. As Deutsch points out, learning is a form of neuroplastic change. Here are the 3 types of learning that I believe are most relevant to today's porn users. First, there's good old conscious learning. In this case, it's, oh, this is how it's done. This is how people have sex, and this is how I should do it. Then there's unconscious learning. In this case, it's sexual conditioning, or, man, this is what turns me on. This is a deeper, more ingrained form of learning. Examples for porn users could involve watching porn is simply more exciting than having sex, or needing to click video to video just to stay sexually aroused, or simply developing a porn-induced fetish. The last is pathological learning or addiction, which Dr. Hilton will discuss. In this case, the addict feels as though the addiction is necessary to his survival. The addiction is to be defined as continued use despite negative consequences. Now, both research and the media usually focus on what adolescents consciously learn about sex and relationships. Obviously, years of porn use can really skew one's perceptions on sex and shape attitudes. Although this is very important, it's not what I'm going to talk about. So let's move on to the next 2, which are sexual conditioning and porn addiction. These 2 types of learning are behind many of the symptoms and conditions I mentioned earlier. And both are really driven by the unique nature of internet porn. To understand what makes internet porn unique, we need to look at the reward circuit. Sorry about that. Reward circuit, I'll do it like that. I mean the reward. So, this is an accurate picture of the reward circuit, and it's pretty much the same in all mammals. Here is a simpler version because I'm a simple man, and we're looking at the center of the brain. It's small but mighty. The reward circuit is activated when we engage in behaviors that further our survival, or especially the survival of our genes, such as eating, sex, bonding and love, achievement, taking risks, and novelty. Now notice novelty. Novelty activates the reward circuit, and that's what really drives the internet, makes it so enticing. Dopamine, as was mentioned earlier, dopamine is the neurochemical that powers the reward circuit. Think of the reward circuit as the engine that drives our most basic behaviors, and dopamine as the gas. Dopamine is the craving neurochemical. Its message is this: I've got to have it, whatever it is, whether it's sex, potato chips, or the Longhorns beating the Sooners. And as an Oregon native, I apologize to Mac Brown. Speaking of cravings, all addictive chemicals and activities elevate dopamine. That's what makes them potentially addictive. Of course, you need continued use to manifest the brain changes that lead to addiction. The key point is, drugs simply hijack the circuits and mechanisms that evolve for normal rewards, such as sex. Dopamine is not really about pleasure. Those are other brain chemicals, such as opioids or endorphins. Dopamine is wanting. Dopamine is anticipation of something really, really good. Since dopamine is wanting and anticipation, it provides the motivation to pursue rewards. Dopamine propels us into action, and some scientists call the reward circuit the seeking circuit. So let's go to the next one and find out where dopamine fits in with porn. This graph is of dopamine levels in the reward center. Sexual stimulation is our greatest natural reward, so porn, of course, is quite compelling, especially to teens who are far more sensitive to dopamine. However, beyond just sexual stimulation, the internet has unique properties that can keep dopamine surging. First of all, there's endless novelty. With each new email or each new porn star, you get a little squirt of dopamine. Searching and seeking with anticipation pumps up dopamine. And material that shocks or surprises also raises dopamine. Anxiety can cause a jump in dopamine. That's why watching horror movies or maybe doing bungee jumping can be so exciting. In fact, studies find that anxiety increases sexual arousal. As soon as your dopamine starts to drop, you can click to the new image or a new video or a new genre of porn, and up goes your dopamine. You can have 20 tabs open, each with a 3-minute video, and just start clicking away. If lesbian porn no longer does it, you can go on to girls with goats. And some users can maintain this high arousal state, which means high dopamine, for hours, deliberately deferring ejaculation. This is called edging. Today, it's not uncommon for people to use porn when they don't masturbate. They watch it in airplanes, or at work, or in libraries, or on their smartphones at school. Or maybe they simply start after dinner and surf porn until 2 a.m. when they fall asleep. Not only has the content of porn evolved to be ever more extreme, so has the delivery system. Porn is now omnipresent, free, and accessible to every age, any time. Addictive drugs and food have limits to consumption. Internet porn has no limit at all. You can watch day in, day out, all day long, and keep your dopamine elevated. And that's the key point, because ultimately, dopamine is telling us to remember and to repeat. Dopamine helps to wire together the sights, the sounds, the emotions, the sensations, and the memories associated with a big reward, such as masturbation and orgasm, creating a pathway that can blast the reward center. So when this pathway is activated, it creates feelings of wanting and feelings of craving. So sexual conditioning means training the brain to want and crave sexual arousal under specific conditions. With internet porn use, this includes being alone, voyeurism rather than participation, continuously searching and seeking for the next dopamine hit, multiple tabs, each with a 3-minute video, shock and surprise to maintain arousal, multiple porn stars per session per video, fetishes of every type. You couldn't do this with a Playboy magazine. You couldn't do this with VHS tapes. So you're asking yourself, that sounds pretty good. So what's the big deal if you condition your sexual arousal to porn? The problem is that porn doesn't match real intimacy or real sex. At the very least, this can manifest as not being able to be sexually aroused with a real partner. Now we can visualize sexual conditioning for a 13-year-old boy just getting started on internet porn. So adding porn into the mix creates 2 competing pathways. One is porn in yellow, and the other is real people in white. Sure, Jessica in algebra is cute, but if a 13-year-old is masturbating every day to gangbangs, cream pies, and double penetration, good old Jessica pathways will have a hard time competing. This process is analogous to walking through a field of grass. The more often you take that path, the easier it becomes. Eventually, porn can be the path that the young man prefers. And why would he prefer it? Well, he prefers this porn pathway because it leads to a bigger reward. The white line is dotted because many young guys who have chronic porn-induced ED, it takes them months and months just to build up the real pathways. To sum up this concept, sexual conditioning can be related to many of these porn-induced sexual problems that I listed earlier. Does this picture look familiar? Well, addictions begin with the same mechanism that evolved for sexual conditioning, That is wiring together everything associated with dopamine highs to form a pathway. And when this pathway is activated, it creates cravings for whatever it is. Sensitization is the technical term for these deeply entrenched pathways. With addiction, these craving pathways are just overwhelmingly powerful. So, sensitization is often the first major brain change caused by any addiction. The second major brain change is called desensitization, or what we simply call a numb pleasure response. Here's one way to visualize desensitization and sensitization. On the left, we have sensitization. Anything associated with the addiction causes a big blast of dopamine and other neurochemicals. On the right is desensitization. Everything else is far less exciting than what it used to be, such as socializing or playing sports or watching a movie or even sex. Now this is what drives all addictions, the imbalance between the overpowering cravings of addiction and the numb pleasure response you have. Add this, the pain of withdrawals, and you can see that it's easy to go back to one's addiction. Desensitization is caused at a physical level by lower dopamine levels and fewer dopamine receptors. The receptors determine the sensitivity of dopamine. So let's look at that. So here we have our two nerve cells communicating, and we can see one is sending a message and the other is receiving it. So the one receiving it is receiving these little round balls, and that's dopamine, and it's hearing the message in these receptors. So think of receptors as little ears hearing the message. The number of receptors activated equals the strength of the message. But things change with overstimulation. With dopamine constantly blasting the reward circuit, the nerve cells say, enough is enough. It's as if someone screams at you and you cover your ears. So nerve cells do this by removing the dopamine receptors in the bottom picture. Fewer dopamine receptors activated means less excitement. It's as if your 8-cylinder engine is now running on 2 cylinders, and that's your reward circuit. So according to research, what are the conditions and symptoms associated with low dopamine and low dopamine receptors? Well, low libido is one of them, and pretty much the rest of my list. Now, that doesn't mean that dopamine is the only factor, but it can be a big one. Also, concentration problems and ADHD. In fact, Ritalin and Adderall given for ADHD work by raising dopamine. Dopamine is the motivation neurochemical, so low motivation goes with low dopamine. Depression also. Now maybe you thought that serotonin was associated with depression, but it's not. That's been refuted. Actually, in recent rat studies, they turned depression on and off by simply turning dopamine nerve cells on and off. Social anxiety is quite complex, but many studies suggest a big role for dopamine. And many animal and human studies show that low dopamine is associated with fear and anxiety, and the same goes for less confidence and being risk averse. So to summarize, the question is the return to normal dopamine balance and dopamine sensitivity behind the many improvements these guys experience? I think it's a big part of it. So let's look at another brain change that may be involved. So here's a picture of the reward circuit, and the key thing to notice is that it goes all the way up to the front part of the brain, which is our most evolved part of the brain, the frontal lobes. Here's the problem. The reward circuit supplies the dopamine, supplies the gas to the frontal lobes. If the reward circuit dopamine's low, so this part of the brain really suffers. And so what may occur is desensitization. Low dopamine may lead to the last condition, which is hypofrontality. And all that means is that the frontal lobes just aren't working up to par. And here's just a few of the functions that the frontal lobes are involved with. So with addiction, any of these functions could be adversely affected. Notice self-control and impulse control, they really suffer, and that's what makes quitting addiction challenging. Now, guys who quit porn experience improvements in many of these functions. They're more goal-directed, more organized, they think clearer, they feel smarter, and they have greater willpower. So, the bottom line is that reversing these many brain changes seems to be behind many of the benefits experienced by the guys who give up porn. Now, although there are no studies, well, we're going to talk about one soon, but there are no studies published that have had porn users eliminate porn for several months, there are about 60 recent brain studies on internet addiction. Half of those studies are on video games, and the other half are on just plain old internet, so that means they probably had internet porn as part of what they studied. Every single study found the same brain changes as seen in drug addicts. That's not surprising because all addictions share the same brain changes. Later on, we're going to look at a short video of the first brain scan study to isolate porn addicts from other types of internet applications. Now, internet porn addiction, in my view, is an internet addiction, but internet porn is unique. Can World of Warcraft ever cause chronic ED? Can smoking cigarettes ever change your sexual taste? There are no innate circuits for first-person shooter or cocaine or alcohol or nicotine, but there is for sexuality and reproduction. Addiction or not, internet porn has the ability to alter and shape some users' innate sexual circuits, and these circuits have a wide influence over our behaviors. Now, this is important to keep in mind when we consider the adolescent brain. The adolescent brain is not an adult brain with less experience. It is anatomically, biochemically, and physiologically different. It's a time of really big brain changes, and interesting enough, these brain changes go all the way to age 25, and that's why insurance companies have that cutoff point. Sorry about that. The adolescence is a critical window of development with an evolutionary purpose. And what is that purpose? One of the main purposes is to rewire to one's environment in order to successfully reproduce. The following quote highlights the possible ramifications of high-speed porn meeting the adolescent brain. I'm 25 now, and I've had high-speed internet porn access and started streaming porn videos since age 12. My sexual experience is very limited, and the few times I've had sex have been total disappointments. No erection. Been trying to quit for 5 months now and finally have. I realize that I've been conditioned to the point where my sexual urges are deeply linked to a computer screen. Women don't turn me on unless they are made 2D and behind my glass thermometer. Unquote.